I started this week by writing about how oil and gas companies generate cash. We specifically looked at the cash flow statement and we saw how it was organized into three different sections. The first being cash from operating activities, the second being cash from investing activities, the third being cash from financing activities. And we took real world oil and gas companies and used them as an example for each of those sections. So for cash from operating activities, we used ConocoPhillips on the upstream side. For cash from investing activities, we used Williams on the midstream side. And for cash from financing activities, we used Marathon Petroleum on the downstream side. We went through all the vocabulary. We looked through some history of these cash flows to get a sense of how that's changed over time. So we could have a more complete understanding how oil and gas companies across all segments of the industry are generating cash and how we can understand the amount of cash that they generate. I hosted that post at Foundations of Energy. That's the learning and development newsletter that I built and host at Substack. If you haven't checked it out, I recommend you do. We go through similar energy topics to what I post about on LinkedIn, but I take them down to first principles. We go through them more thoroughly, offer some more context, and really introduce and try to embrace this concept. We do it once every single week and cover a wide range of topics, depending, frankly, on what's in current events, what seems to be most relevant at that point in time. My second post this week was about how R&D spend inside of oilfield services is telling us some very different stories. When we look at SLB's R&D spend over time for the past 10 years, we've seen this number continue to come down. Not just in terms of the dollars, but in terms of the ratio of R&D spend to revenue. For SLB, it continues to come down. For Halliburton, when we look at R&D spend relative to revenue, it's been flat over the course of the past decade. So it's really starting to tell us some interesting realities around how the management team at SLB versus the management team at Halliburton is thinking about their R&D dollars and how to deploy them and how to sustain them or not sustain them over time. So in a sector like oilfield services that relies and communicates so heavily around the notion of innovation, paying attention to these R&D spend levels can be truly fascinating. My third post this week was about an energy book club that I want to launch starting in January. What I'm thinking about doing is, we will pick a book. It's not been chosen yet, but whoever's going to participate in the club, all get votes. We'll collectively pick a book. We'll take on the order of 6 weeks to read this book, spend 2 or 3 sessions while we're reading it, talking about the book. Then hopefully for the crew that's in Houston, we can meet up at the end of the book and have a little miniature celebration of sorts. And if the first book goes well, why not run it back and do it again? And we'll just keep doing it as long as there's interest and we feel like we're getting some value out of it. So collected a bunch of interest on that and email addresses. I'll send out a note probably at the beginning of next week about how we can put this thing together and make it as valuable and as fun as we can. My fourth post this week was about how oilfield services versus the E&P sector are differentiating themselves in terms of how much cash they're handing over to shareholders. I specifically looked at the ratio of the cash from operations that each of these sectors is generating. What fraction of that is being handed back over to shareholders in the terms of either dividends or share repurchases? I track just over the course of my research a large basket of publicly traded companies in the E&P space and a large basket of companies in the OFS space. And I looked at their aggregate financials because I'm covering a large enough group of big enough companies that we can pull some sector specific learnings out of these data sets. And we're seeing just in the past quarter, OFS finally has overtaken the E&Ps in terms of handing over a larger fraction of their cash from operations, again, in the form of dividends or share repurchases. This is a topic that shows up in a lot of press releases. It shows up in a lot of earnings call conversations. It really is worth paying attention to, particularly if you're a shareholder or potential shareholder. Just how aggressive are the OFS companies being? How aggressive are E&P operators being in handing over this cash? And that's what I covered in that last post. Each week, I send out a free weekly newsletter that includes links to, summaries of all the posts that I publish online. That way, you don't have to rely on social media algorithms to surface that stuff for you. I also include an energy related anecdote, insight, or observation that I don't publish anywhere else. So even if you've seen everything that I've published online, you will still have something new to read in the newsletter. This coming weekend, the anecdote is going to be about how Equinor is stepping up its ownership stake in Ørsted, a offshore wind producer of sorts. and what that tells us about how different oil and gas companies are or are not leaning into these lower carbon directions. So, if that's a topic that interests you, I recommend you sign up to receive my newsletter. As always, thanks so much for reading, watching, liking, commenting, just engaging in general. I really appreciate it. I hope you had a fantastic week, and we will talk soon.